Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing the documentary Beyond Utopia, currently streaming on video on demand, soon to premiere on Hulu in early January. So briefly, Beyond Utopia is a documentary by Madeline Gavin that explores the hardships North Koreans must go through in order to escape the regime. The documentary is less about the North Korean government and more about the 26 million people who have been suffering in silence for the past 70 years. Overall, the documentary took about 4.5 years to make, and up until 2 weeks before its premiere at Sundance, they weren't even really sure they would have a documentary to screen. Initially, Gavin was approached to adapt the memoir, The Girl with the Seven Names, a memoir by Hyun Lee, one of the most famous defectors, who later actually helped her family escape from North Korea. And so, in the beginning, the documentary was supposed to follow her life and sort of how difficult it is to settle in South Korea after having lived in North Korea your whole life. And an incredible amount of research went into this documentary. Gavin went as far as relying on the dark web. And so of course she was using VPN, and depending on the country she would search from, she would find different material regarding North Korean propaganda. And while on the dark web, she came across this hidden camera footage that people were basically risking their lives to upload in order to show everyone what life really is like in North Korea. So the documentary took a massive turn when she was introduced to Pastor Kim, who gave her access to two families that he was actively helping escape North Korea before the pandemic. And this, of course, allowed her not only to show audiences how much more difficult the trek has gotten over the years, but also humanize the North Korean people. Beyond Utopia shoots on the border of China and North Korea, arguably one of the most dangerous places in the world. And so you will be watching this documentary kind of on the edge of your seat, kind of concerned. A part of me wondered, like, is this documentary hurting or helping? But it is important to note that the filmmaker went through great lengths to get the permission of everyone involved before screening the film. Surprisingly, this documentary has received acclaim across the board. It is considered one of the best documentaries of the year. And for me, it is the best documentary of the year. It's insane. And after Sundance, streamers were not that interested. Right, and it's a bit heartbreaking because a platform like Netflix or Amazon, this should be seen by millions of people, around the world, and yet no one was really interested. And it was a bit jarring because Gavin's previous documentary, City of Joy, about war-torn Eastern Congo, was purchased and promoted by Netflix. So there are a number of reasons for this. So over the years, streamers have actually stopped purchasing political documentaries. There was a time where Netflix was really kind of on it, but over the years, they kind of just stopped. So most streamers have now prioritized profit over growth. And so they actively avoid buying things that are seen as too political because they basically don't want to alienate different markets around the world and sort of hinder their own growth. So even if they were to purchase a documentary like Beyond Utopia, it's in danger of either being shelved or limited release, right? Only being released in countries like the US. In the case of Beyond Utopia, it was actually a risk for streamers because not that long ago in 2014, Sony was actually hacked, and this was in retaliation to a movie called The Interview. So the North Korean government basically hacked Sony Pictures because they felt that the movie was humiliating and sort of degrading their leader. And Beyond Utopia doesn't seek to humiliate the government or its leaders. Instead, it sort of criticizes them. But it seems like this is not something that they would want on their platform. I think it's very telling of how massive these streamers have gotten, right? They are pretty much the gatekeepers. They decide what's too political and what's not. And unfortunately, it's entirely based on profit, right? If it kind of seriously hinders subscriber growth, then they're not going to do it. So hopefully this documentary, once it premieres on Hulu, will actually get the recognition that it deserves. So again, if you can, seek it out because it deserves to be seen. Beyond Utopia is an extraordinary documentary because it not only takes you through the hardships of escaping North Korea, but really tries to get you to understand what ordinary people go through day to day living in a country like this. I did not know how difficult it was to escape North Korea. The logistics of it is mad. So just to give you an idea, According to official South Korean figures, about 1,047 North Koreans arrived in the country in 2019, and this number fell to only 229 in 2020. And so again, like COVID and post-COVID, it has been a nightmare for people trying to escape. Okay, so there are basically two ways out of North Korea. The first is through South Korea, which is impossible because the border is basically laced with landmines and bombs and everything. So the only other option is through China. Unfortunately, China has a very strict policy of repatriating people caught trying to escape North Korea. And over the years, they have actually gotten a lot more harsh. They've increased their security and they've actually offered rewards for turning people in. So if caught, defectors basically face all kinds of sort of horrific situations. They face sex trafficking, organ trafficking, death, like anything you can imagine, they can kind of be subject to. So in order to be safe, defectors have to make it all the way to Thailand. So even if they make it to Laos or Vietnam, these countries are they have very close ties to North Korea. So they can either repatriate someone back to North Korea or they will imprison them and later release them. But whatever the case may be, they are equally hostile to defectors. In order to escape North Korea, basically they have to rely on these people called brokers, which only care about money. And actually I was shocked to learn that sometimes these brokers would actually encourage North Koreans to escape so that they could later either turn them into the Chinese authorities for a higher sort of payday or basically sell them to human traffickers. The journey is quite long, it's quite dangerous, and only once they're able to kind of make it to Thailand or to a safe space are they sent back to South Korea. And so South Korea basically has a way of resettling. They have resettlement facilities. And so they try to reintegrate North Koreans slowly back into society. So North Koreans who escape actually feel incredibly guilty because they feel like they let people down. They're worried about all the family members, all their loved ones who are back home. So once they do escape North Korea, they often spend their lives trying to help other people escape. And one of the individuals that they seek help from is a man named Pastor Kim. Pastor Kim is an extraordinary person. Like, I didn't even know people like this existed. It makes the world a better place. And so he has basically spent his entire life trying to help North Koreans escape. But not only that, his goal is to end the regime. He basically sees the two as being just one and the same. His wife is North Korean, and so the reason he knows about all these different ways to help people escape is because he learned about it while trying to help his own wife escape. Over the years, Pastor Kim has basically created an underground railroad that stretches from China all the way to Thailand. However, his job has gotten incredibly more difficult over the years. 20 years ago, $5 was enough to bribe somebody. Now, just attempting to bribe somebody can get you killed or imprisoned. And these bribes have actually gone up to as high as $5,000. And the cost of an escape can cost upwards of $20,000. So it's incredibly expensive and there are no guarantees that you will actually escape. So what I thought was crazy about Pastor Kim is that he actually goes there himself to try and help people, guide them through the process. Due to the dangers of his job, he's suffered a number of injuries. He has a severe neck injury. He has a metal rod placed on his back. He had surgery to remove his gallbladder. His mother and brother actually went to jail in China. This is not a country that he's welcome in. And actually, if he does go to China, they have threatened him with sending him to North Korea. And I think the biggest tragedy of all is that he actually ended up losing his son while he was away helping somebody else escape. Despite these tragedies, despite these hardships, his faith has never sort of shaken. And so he continues to help people try and escape. As I said, there are no guarantees when it comes to escaping North Korea. Not all of Pastor Kim's sort of missions have been successful, and currently he has hundreds of people basically hiding in China and many more who are currently just in dire need of being rescued. And this could be because they're either being abused or they're being forced to sell themselves or even their child. This is a very extreme situation that the average person in the West cannot really wrap their minds around. To walk us through the dangers of escaping, the documentary focuses on two groups. One is the Rowe family, and the other is a woman named So-Yeon Lee, a mother who is trying desperately to help her son escape. And I think what this documentary did so well is that it actually gets you super invested, because you feel like you've learned a lot about these individuals involved, and you feel for them. You understand what they're escaping and why they want to escape it so badly. In the case of So-Yeon Lee, she basically was able to successfully defect, but it wasn't easy. The first time she was caught, she was brutally tortured, and the cost of escaping was leaving her son behind. And so she hadn't actually seen her son in over 10 years. So ever since she kind of made it to South Korea, she's been working very hard to reunite with him. And so I don't really want to ruin it, but just to stress, like, getting caught, like, it means death, right? So if her son is caught, he will either be killed or sent to a gulag where he will eventually die. Like, the risks are just incredibly enormous. And once you are in North Korean custody, like, nothing will get you out. There is no bribery in the world which will allow you access to the people you love, right? So it really is like do or die. So the second group of people the documentary follows is the Rowe family, and they're also in a very dire situation because some members of their family had already escaped. So they're trying to help like the rest of their family escape. So North Korea basically imposes collective punishment on anyone who leaves. So the families of those left behind are often isolated. They're often just tortured. Like, their lives are made much worse. Oftentimes they really have no choice but to follow in their family's footsteps and just try to get out themselves. So in the case of the Rowe family, it's an incredibly difficult trek because they have young children with them. And on top of that, they have like their elderly grandmother. So all of them are trying by foot to make it out of North Korea. So it is just like intense. The documentary is very careful not to just focus on the escape. Like, it also contextualizes everybody for you by giving you not only a brief history of North Korea, but also like details about what day-to-day life is like in this country. Literally goes back and forth, and I think the pacing of the documentary is really good because you're getting this history and then you're coming back to this escape. And so as the film goes on, you get more and more invested, right? Like, you really want to see everyone escape and, you know, be reunited with their families. And when things don't work out, you really, like, you're heartbroken for them. It's as if, like, the documentary tries its best to basically develop a personal connection between the audience and the people that we're seeing escape, and I think it works. You're listening to people basically describe how hard it is in North Korea, like finding food every day, trying to meet all the requirements of the North Korean government. Like, it does kind of make you rethink what you know about North Korea. Like, the documentary isn't trying to make fun of its laws. It's not really trying to get you to say, oh my God, that's so crazy. Like, what it's trying to get you to do is think, listen, like, try to get you to understand how hostile the environment is and how, like, basically, like, what day-to-day life is like, right? Really try to get the audience to empathize with the people there and see them, like, as people. This context really does force you to rethink your opinion of North Korea, because from a Western perspective, whenever we hear about North Korea, it's always about their nuclear weapons, or it's always about these elaborate ceremonies that they put on to basically try and convince the world that they are very much in union and everybody is happy there, and, you know, they're very strong and nothing can stop them. I think because much of the discourse is around their nuclear weapons and these kind of weird performances, we have kind of come to associate the North Korean government with its people, right? They've kind of become synonymous. For example, like, the documentary goes in depth in terms of like how much work these crazy ceremonies take, like children doing backflips on cement, breaking their backs, breaking their legs. Like, this is like a brutal sort of regime, and granted, like, anybody kind of watching it knows that there's something off about it, but when you're actually kind of being walked through it, it is quite horrifying, right? Like, you know that, like, these children are suffering. In terms of these nukes, like, North Korea is a very unique country in that these nukes are not for deterrence, right? Like, they actively threaten the United States of America. Like, they say that they will use them, but it's a bit odd because if they use them, then that's pretty much the end of their regime. And so these nukes are basically the only reason that people don't really mess with them. everything that countries have done to try and punish North Korea have only really hurt the people of North Korea, and like not so much this government. North Korea wants so badly for the outside world to believe that its people stand by its government. However, North Korean people don't really know what life is like outside of North Korea, right? They've been fed lies, lie after lie after lie their entire lives. So much of their day revolves around survival, right? Finding something to eat, finding like just kind of getting through day to day. And so I find it interesting that all this propaganda about the outside world in terms of people starving or in terms of people being oppressed are actually their own history, right? One of the points that the documentary makes very well is how the regime uses religion and like the imagery of religion to basically justify its rule over its people, right? Like painting its leaders as gods and really stressing to its population that they are untouchable, right? Like they are the divine, and any attempts against them, like it's impossible, right? And so this imagery of God also, it has this psychological effect because making the government seem totally impenetrable. I think what the doc did very well, and again, it was very careful to do that, like despite it being sort of a uphill battle, like overthrowing the North Korean regime is a very difficult task, but it's not an entirely like hopeless task. North Korea is heavily reliant on the obedience of its people to maintain power, and the documentary makes this very clear. Like despite their hardship, like family is very important within North Korea. They do have very strong family bonds, and so when people defect, they feel very guilty because all they can think about is everyone they left behind, right? Like, how am I going to save everyone? So this sense of community is sort of both a curse and a blessing. So currently the birth rate in North Korea is going down, and even in October, the leader Kim Jong-un was seen crying on TV, urging women to have more children in order to strengthen national power. And so when I say that family is both a blessing and a curse, is because North Korea really does rely on families. It really does rely on its people to keep the propaganda going. Even if people want to escape, even if they do want to like make a move, they don't really want to risk their families. I say that family is both a blessing and a curse. I mean that the North Korean government really relies on its people for propaganda. And so family is a way to kind of keep people in their place. According to the documentary, there seems to be a lot of inner turmoil within North Korea. It seems like Kim Jong-un has been killing people left and right. In addition, it seems like the number of black markets within North Korea is just increasing like exponentially. And so, 1 in 8 people have a cell phone. So it becomes increasingly difficult to shut out the outside world. The only method that's currently available for toppling the North Korean regime is to flood the country with foreign materials. And this is because you need some other narrative to gain traction. Like, it's incredibly difficult to convince people who have been told their whole lives that not only is the outside world horrible and that everybody hates you, but like North Korea is a utopia, right? A lot of people feel like, as bad as it is here, it's probably much worse out there. So trying to flood the country with as much sort of material as possible, it seems like this is probably one of the only ways that could possibly work, because it makes it incredibly difficult for the North Korean government to justify keeping its people in poverty, right? Like, people will at best or at worst want more material, right? They're going to want a better life, especially as this black market gets better. And so it's going to be very difficult for the North Korean government to kind of keep up with demand, because people are going to demand some type of standard of living, which at the moment, North Korea is just not able to provide due to all the sanctions. As depressing as this documentary is, like, it's not a matter of if, but when, right? Eventually that wall will come down and North Korea will be free. But again, this is unlike any regime in the world. The UN released a 400-page report basically outlining the horrors in North Korea. And the only regime they could compare it to was like Hitler's Germany. Like, that's how crazy things are. But the documentary tries to create a picture to explain basically like our complicity in the regime, right? Like, one of the reasons North Korea is able to successfully evade the law is because we've allowed its people to become associated with its government, right? Like, the North Korean people, they did not choose their leaders. They have no say about what goes on in their countries. Like, they did really nothing to deserve these like what's happening to them. I think it's important to stress, like, people don't want to leave their country. Like, a lot of the defectors basically said they were very sad to leave, but they really didn't have any choice. Like, nobody wants to leave their families behind, nobody wants to leave their communities behind, but the regime, they just kind of put a gun to their heads. One of the sort of moments that took me out is when Pastor Kim is basically explaining how crazy North Korea is. You know, North Korea should be part of South Korea. I mean, they are one country, right? You have two different groups of people who have the same culture, who have the same background, who share the same language, but are totally living like they're living like two different like realities. And so when you put it that way, it becomes even more jarring. So I think, as much as the documentary wants to shed a light on the North Korean people, it also kind of wants to have a conversation with its audience and really show how, basically, in part, that we have also been complicit. And so, in part, the documentary does want to highlight, you know, everything wrong with North Korea, but it also wants the audience to question their government's own complicity. Right? Like, why is it that we don't hear about the people of North Korea? Like, anytime North Korea comes up, its people are never really in the headlines. And there is a reason for that, right? It's a lot easier for us to distance ourselves from, you know, a crazy dictator who is always weirdly smiling than ordinary people who are just trying to live their lives and survive day to day. And that's what the documentary tries to do. It tries to ground it in reality and kind of show, like, listen, these people are not that different from me and you. And so we need to approach things differently. Maybe this change of approach is what is needed to make a change. So overall, I highly recommend this documentary. I would say buy it if you can buy it. Support it in any way you can, and I will catch you all later.